because life cycle assessment was initially created specifically to address products. In fact, it was the question of returnable soda bottles versus single-use soda bottles. That was the first question posed that led to the creation of LCA. And packaging was the topic for the first few years of LCA. But it doesn't have to be restricted to products.
Welcome to the Urbanista, where we discuss the water management challenges of Nordic cities. From safe drinking water distribution and stormwater collection to building sustainable urban living environments. Here is your host, Delphine Vesalo.
Hey, welcome back, Urbanistas. Carbon footprint reduction is on the agenda of many companies, and life cycle assessment has been one of the key elements in this process. Yes, calculating the carbon footprint of your own product is a good start. And our guest today knows a thing or two about that. So who are you and what do you do?
Hi, Delphine. Well, glad to be here with you today. And I teach life cycle assessment at Harvard. I've been doing that since the late 90s. I've been a life cycle assessment consultant since the mid 90s. I currently direct research in life cycle assessment, applying life cycle assessment at companies at MIT. And I'm a co-founder of a platform for making life cycle assessment radically more accessible in the world. And that platform is called Earthster.
All right. Yes, there are a lot of discussions, a lot of conversation around carbon emissions and carbon footprint, how to reduce them. But in order to reduce those emissions, we first need to know how much carbon footprint are we living, and we understand that's one of the key things that we can get to know through the life cycle assessment. But to start with the basics, so Greg, what exactly is life cycle assessment?
Yes, well, life cycle assessment, and interestingly, was born. I love to ask people to guess. When do you think life cycle assessment was first created? At least the way we practice it now, and the answer is a little over 50 years ago now. So it was basically created right about the same time as the first Earth Day. 1970 was the first Earth Day. That's also the year that the US EPA was created. It was a time of great environmental ferment, of course, awakening, you could say. And life cycle assessment was created in 1968, 1969. And the intent of this method was to try and answer a question: which of different ways of making a product or using a product would be better for the environment overall? So the key words there, I think, are environment, overall, and product. That's what life cycle assessment is about. It's trying to give us an environmental assessment, not just a climate assessment, but look at all the issues, whatever those may be, that are important environmentally. Look at them comprehensively in relation usually to products. And I say usually because life cycle assessment was initially created specifically to address products. In fact, it was the question of returnable soda bottles versus single-use soda bottles. That was the first question posed that led to the creation of LCA. And packaging was the topic for the first few years of LCA. But it doesn't have to be restricted to products. Life cycle assessment has been applied to lifestyles, households, regions, companies, and so forth. You can do an organizational life cycle assessment, but the original creation of LCA was definitely to give you a holistic environmental evaluation of products and to help you choose the best and make any situation better, any product system better.
So it's not only, as you said, about products or how any given manufacturer produces a product and what it takes, and what is, of course, all the carbon footprint that left behind after producing that item specifically, but then while using that product or in a different type of environment. So that will also be in the scope of LCA, or that can also be measured or assessed or evaluated with LCA.
Yes, you're helping remind us the term life cycle is present in the name. And what it refers to, of course, is the life cycle from cradle to grave or cradle to cradle of a product, and very much including but going beyond the production phase, as you say. So it's cradle means not just manufacturing the product, but manufacturing all the inputs used to produce the product, manufacturing all of the inputs used to produce those inputs, going all the way upstream as far as we need to capture everything that matters environmentally, and then looking downstream, looking at distribution of the product, use of the product, and end-of-life management for the product. So if it's sent to recycling, what are the environmental impacts of the recycling? But beneficial as well as negative.
So this has been an interesting evolution, as you put. It's not just products. You mentioned even households. So I'm thinking about, well, our homes or our buildings or our shopping centers, or so those can also be, I mean, the overall running the business, should I say it, or the overall, that can also be. But there, how many items, how many variables can we get there in any given building?
It's amazing. So I like to tell students learning LCA, because they ask, where do we draw the boundaries? And of course, companies ask this too. And I think the real true answer is, if it matters, it should be included. And so if it matters means if something that is affected by the choice to use a product or the design of a product or service, if there's an impact that makes a significant contribution on at least one category of impact to the total in the perspective of the total life cycle impacts, if it matters, if it makes a significant contribution, then you shouldn't exclude it. If you do exclude it, you have to justify that exclusion. And as you say, LCA has been evolving. We used to think that we could exclude the impacts of making a factory, constructing and maintaining the factory in which, let's say, the cars or trucks or laptop computers are manufactured. We thought, well, surely because this factory will be here for 50 years, and so we have to divide the impacts of the factory over all the laptops made in 50 years, surely those impacts will be trivial per laptop. That was the assumption, until somebody tested that assumption and found out it's not true. In fact, the factory matters. If you think about transportation, the road matters. Literally building the road and maintaining the road, even though 1 million trucks will drive on that road over its lifetime, I say 1 million, who knows, a large number of trucks will drive over that road in its lifetime, still one truck worth of road construction still matters in terms of the environmental impacts of transporting a product in a truck.
But then talking about this, the lifetime, because yes, if we are talking sometimes about buildings, so meaning constructions that will live there for a very long time, or any type of public infrastructure, what you mentioned, a road, whatever, a new shopping center, a new daycare for. So that will be there, that will remain there for the next 100 years, 150 years, I don't know. So how do you extrapolate? How do you cover all those years, or how does exactly this work? Because it seems like a huge amount of data, a huge amount of variables to consider, and it's just forecasting, or how do you do it?
That's another great question, Delphin. So, think about how were the pyramids made, and I guess it took a lot of efforts by a lot of people. incredible amounts of person hours of labor and contributions that were accumulated one after another. We had one generation of people building the first layer of the pyramids and through their lives, and then they died, maybe, and along came the next generation to lay the next layer. We've been building life cycle assessment databases and information sources for also decades. And when we produce a life cycle assessment today, we're also relying on information contributions that have been made over the past several decades. Now, people have updated those databases, but with newer data, thankfully. But the structure, so much of the structure of the model of the supply chain or the life cycle has been created over decades by thousands of person hours of work. So when we, for example, start to model the life cycle of a product, transportation is always present. Rail transport, ocean transport, and truck transport, for example. They're always present. And thankfully, we don't have to do that modeling. We simply say 70 kilometers of truck transport in Europe of a certain type of truck for this much mass. And we use databases that include not only the impacts of the truck transport, but the impacts of manufacturing that truck, of manufacturing the steel used to build the truck, of producing the energy necessary to produce the steel. All of that, thousands, ultimately millions of parameters, as you point out, are contained in these models, in these databases that we use for life cycle assessment.
But all these databases that you are mentioning, where are they? Because do they live as a individual standalone entity somewhere in some governmental computer, or I don't know if they are all computerized, actually digitalize it. That's another thing, right. I guess. Where are all those databases? Where do they live?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that gets me excited about this topic of bringing radically increasing the accessibility of LCA. When the first LCAs were done, it was literally one consulting firm doing the work. And believe it or not, you talk about digitization. Those people, it's hard to imagine, but they performed those life cycle calculations with slide rules.
Okay.
They didn't have, they had pencils and paper and slide rules to do their work. So we've come a long way. We now have these databases. The databases have been created, as I mentioned, over decades through research projects. And one of the major contributors of data, of life cycle assessment data to the world has been the Swiss government, as a matter of fact. The small country of Switzerland has made a huge contribution to global life cycle assessment because they funded, the Swiss EPA, Buval, funded a series of studies, hundreds of life cycle assessments that were done in the public domain in the 1980s and 1990s, always contributing more data into the public domain. Actually, to the point where around 2000, there was too much data in Switzerland and it was conflicting with itself. You had data from one research institute covering the same topic as data from another research institute, and they didn't always have the same numbers. And the Swiss government said, we need to consolidate all of this data into a single database and make it available for LCA practitioners around the world. That was the birth of what's called the EcoInvent database. It's the largest, most transparent life cycle assessment database in the world. And by transparency, I mean that when you get a result for, here's the impact of transporting something in a truck, you can ask why. You can say, where are these impacts coming from? How much is from the road? How much is from the truck? How much is from the steel in the truck? With EcoInvent, you can always look upstream and see those impacts, and you can find what we call hotspots, the key contribution, the key processes that contribute a major contribution, make a major contribution to total impacts. So the EcoInvent database is a great example. It's the most important example of a database for LCA, but there are many. And you asked also, where are these data? I think you also mean who has access.
Exactly, who has access? Because if I imagine in actually several aspects here. If they're in different, let's call them buckets, I don't know, in different standalone entities, are they connected? Can we connect them? How that happens? Because the data that I may have from my own company, from my own product, I may have it myself because I own that. But in order to do this comprehensive LCA, I need to access the data of my partners, the whole supply chain, whoever it comes from Asia, from North America, from wherever it comes. Yeah. All those data points, what is the quality of those data points? How are they ensured that they are true, that are updated? And second, are they, interchangeable? Is the data normalized so you can clearly say this data point from this part of the supply chain is equivalent to this other one that comes from Asia, to this other one that comes from North America? That seems to me a bit challenging. Or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. This question of who has access to the data, both the average data like EcoInvent, but also the data that needs to be contributed by companies all over the world in our global supply chains, is so key. And solving that problem, moving us into a modern situation on that problem, is one of the missions of the Earthster project that we talked about. We can talk about. I mentioned it. The way we've been doing LCA over decades, the old-fashioned way, I would say, which has still been the standard way up until extremely recently, is a bit like having just a few. It's the consultants were in charge. The consultants had a monopoly on the information. It's a bit like 100 people in a room want to speak with one another. They need to work something out. They need to have a conversation. But there were just 3 people in the room, the 3 consultants, and you could only talk to the consultant. So you could say something to the consultant and other people could say something, and the consultant would decide what information we each have access to. But we couldn't talk to each other. What we clearly can do now with the web and with software tools, platforms like Earthster, is you can connect directly to your suppliers. You can use the EcoInvent database to understand generically how your product is made and what its impacts are. But then you can reach out directly to your suppliers and say, here's how I'm currently modeling you using EcoInvent information. Can you check this? Can you improve it and make it more accurately descriptive of your processes? And then will you share with me just the results of that analysis so I get a much more accurate picture of what I produce? And we create what we call connected collaborative life cycle assessment. And it's a totally new way to do LCA. It's democratizing it. It means that everybody participating is benefiting, is sharing only what they're comfortable sharing. And when they improve the accuracy of the processes that they manage, that helps all of us get a more accurate picture of the life cycles of everything we're producing and buying.
Actually, you mentioned the key word that actually I already had in my mind: collaboration. Yes, collaboration, while putting together all these data points, and so I can access through tools like Earthster the data that my suppliers or my any suppliers or product or services that I am using. I'm receiving that. I'm putting all together, and so I get my own results, my own analysis, all good. Between them, is that also shared? Or is there any case for them to share? I don't know, because there may be certain confidentiality policies. I don't know between them, or is it is towards a specific product or service to a specific company that this can be done?
Let me make sure I understand your question, Delphine. Is it between me and my supplier, the confidentiality issue, or between my supplier and somebody else?
Between themselves, between those suppliers. Okay, because I am assuming that, of course, we already have the agreements in place with the people that we work with. Of course, that's why we are requesting you to send me your data so we can we can collaborate and do this together. But what about between themselves? They may or may not know each other.
That's right. So this is another interesting facet of connected collaborative LCA. As you say, these my suppliers are likely to be strongly competitive with one another, and so they're going to share their footprints with me. However, Erster is also collecting data on each one of the producers in their sector. So by participating in this system, what each of those suppliers can do is begin to benchmark themselves versus the average. And they may even be able to understand the variability in the group, in the impacts across the different manufacturers in their sector. So they will get insight. They won't learn about exactly the impacts of their competitors unless the competitor decides to make that public. That's up to the competitor. But every participant will be able to benchmark themselves versus the average performance and possibly the variability in their sector. So everyone gets insight about how well they're doing, an incentive to continuously improve.
Which goes all to being more competitive. If you want, it's measured transparency, should we call it? I can be benchmarked, but hey, if I'm not performing as good as my potential competitor, hey, well, I need to do something. So that I'm realizing that this also increases the competitiveness between all these actors in the process. So all this information, once assessed, is put in one place, digital or not one, which is the form of this final document. We know there's this final resource. We know if the final shape is on a LCA report, if the final shape is an environmental product declaration, perhaps, which are the options to present this to different people that we need to send.
That's another great topic area, Delphine, is in what form do we deliver these results to one another, let's say. Historically, the mechanism for communicating, sharing, storing life cycle assessment results was a report, of course. In fact, originally, of course, paper, published reports, documents. But then we went for decades to digital documents, of course. But still, it's a static report, a snapshot. And you can learn from a report, but you can't ask it questions. You can't really update it. The consultant may be able to update it, but you're stuck with only the answers that have been asked and answered in the report. And what companies now need, because change is ever more rapid and the pressure for continuous progress is stronger and stronger, companies need to be able to quickly ask, what if? They learn from the report that their electricity supply is a major contributor to their footprint. So they say, well, what if we source our electricity from photovoltaics or wind? They need to be able to quickly answer that question. What if we switch to recycled content on the aluminum that we purchase or that we use? What if we send our products to recycling at their end of life? And dozens of additional very important what if questions. For this reason, what I believe and what we're implementing with Erster is a situation where you deliver a report, but you also deliver the model itself in usable form to your client. So we work with consultants. Consultants are a vital player in this LCA world, in the LCA ecosystem, no question about it. They're specialists. They understand LCA. They're highly efficient, and they can teach the companies that they work with about life cycle assessment and the LCA impacts of their products. But consultants can thrive without being monopolizing the knowledge and the power of LCA. They can actually thrive even more by spreading that power to their clients. And they do this by building a model in a platform like Earthster, which is so user-friendly through modern user experiences that the customer, who's not an LCA expert at all, can open up the model, understand their life cycle impacts, and begin to change things and ask what if on their own. And so to answer your question in a nutshell, we still have reports. We still have environmental product declarations, yes. But we also have now newly the models themselves being exchanged among players in this ecosystem.
Because one of the things that, talking about these final reports, as you say, well, in the past, they are just static ones. Once the assessment is finished, is there, printed, quote unquote, printed, and that's it. It's not updated. If 5-10 years passes, I mean, clearly it's outdated. These documents that now, as you said, can be regularly updated as the situation change, or as the elements in the supply chain or in the whatever elements change. Is this report somehow standardized? Because one thing that we have been listening from our side, from the consultants, as in civil engineering consultants or urban designers, that they are presented with either an EPD or an LCA report, and okay, good, I want to assess the elements that I'm putting in this project that we are working now for X or Y government. We are presented with APDs, we are presented with the all the LCA reports, and they turn out to be slightly different. So how can we compare apples with apples if even the reports are not the same? So where are we there with this standardization or lack of?
Yes. I think the key word that at the core of your question, and at the core, one of the core needs, is comparability. True comparability of LCAs or of environmental product declarations, EPDs, of reports, of models, etc. Where are we on the quest for true, let's say, full or reliable comparability? We've come a long way. We still have work to do to finalize that, and I'll tell you a little bit about that journey and where we stand. The first key step toward comparability was the ISO standards for life cycle assessment, implemented initially in the mid-90s and updated in the mid-2000s. So the ISO standards really laid out a lot of requirements and guidelines. If you're going to do an LCA, you need to include this, you need to do it this way, you need to document these aspects of your study, and so on. It helped. But then we discovered that for specific product groups to be true, for the LCAs to be truly comparable, we need to make sure that within the allowances of ISO, sometimes there's flexibility still in ISO. We need to make sure everyone makes the same decision on each of these key flexible things, such as which impact categories do they address? Which parts of the life cycle do they include? How do they define and quantify the function delivered by the product, which is the basis for comparison, a fair comparison? Those issues are all established and nailed down precisely by the product category rules that govern or shape an environmental product declaration. And some people hoped that by just having good, well-written PCRs, product category rules for EPDs, that we had solved the comparability issue. It turns out we haven't. Research has shown that you can still get quite different results on some impact categories even if two consultants follow the same PCR, doing an LCA of the same product. Why? One of the biggest remaining reasons turned out to be the data that they use, the data sources. And so this is an interesting challenge. How do we make sure that ideally everyone would use the same data, but we want the data world to be a competitive space where data providers essentially are competing to provide the most accurate, most appropriate data for each product and service in the economy. If a government agency or a global entity was filling the data gaps for everything, we'd be all set, but that's not the case. We have a marketplace for data. It's a supply and demand context. And so we need competition there rather than a monopoly. And yet we need people to make the same choice. And I think a vision that I actually put forward to an organization called the Sustainability Consortium, still in existence. I first proposed this over 10 years ago to the TSC, was let's evaluate transparency. Transparently, let's evaluate the uncertainty in every data set being supplied to the world into the data marketplace. And let's identify the least uncertain data solution for any question somebody's going to ask. And that least uncertain, most appropriate data set should be used by the practitioners building an LCA on that question. And in that way, we can still have competition in the data world, but we can also ensure that we all use the same data at the same point in time. Now, there's still going to be interesting questions once we implement something like that solution, namely, how do we control the fact that data is continuously improving, that there are updates? But I think that's where we are now, is really the final frontier on this, Delphine, is the data sources and getting consistency in data and making sure that everyone indeed uses the best available data for each task.
Yeah, the reliability of that data, and that everyone understands how to interpret that final document, that is the data that is reflected on that document, which is another of the things that we have been hearing from different types of urban design companies, that we may not fully understand sometimes the difference between one or another. One of the things that I'm realizing is, from your side, for the most part, academia side, okay, we are pushing all this, supporting the ISO standards, but who else? What is missing here? Where is the legal framework? Is there something that we can support us? Have the European Union, for example, step up, or where are we in this in terms of the legal framework for LCA or in general for LBD?
Okay. Well, that's a fascinating topic, and we're at a time of quite some urgency, and it actually relates closely to the point you were making right before your question about how do we interpret results. There have been some lawsuits recently brought against major retailers, for example, in Europe. Lawsuits brought because the plaintiffs accuse the retailers of making statements about the environmental superiority of one product that they sell versus another, it looked to me like they're trying to help consumers make a sustainable choice within the product offerings from the retailer, and yet they were still taken to court. And the accusation was that the data was not perfect. For example, the data on a particular T-shirt was about that kind of T-shirt, but it wasn't about exactly that particular T-shirt being held in the hand of the consumer. The cotton, for example, the information on the impacts of cotton manufacturing was based on a sample taken from cotton farms a few years prior in part of the globe. but not data from the exact farms that supplied the cotton that went into that exact t-shirt. Now, this to me is a bit of a misunderstanding on the part of the plaintiffs if they truly believe what they're complaining, because we never have perfect information. We always have information that is hopefully useful, information with uncertainty, with imperfections. And the question is it useful? Can it help us improve the probability that we make the right environmental choice? It can't guarantee with 100% certainty, that the carbon footprint of this t-shirt is exactly 1.234 kilograms. And so some awareness and some maturity about dealing with imperfect information, which we do in the rest of our lives all the time. Somebody tells you you ask the question, how far away is this restaurant? And they say 1 to 2 kilometers or something like that, 4 or 5 blocks, 10 to 15 minute walk, something like that. You don't expect them to say 12.34 minutes. And so why do we ask for a carbon footprint of 12.34? We need to get used to round numbers in LCA, I think. And because that's the best we're going to be able to do. Things are always changing and data is imperfect. But legal frameworks.
Yes. Well, actually, at one point is this, okay, we just have to live with it. Imperfect information, as you just explained, that would be, I guess, a long process, a long educational process that we are in this type of mindset, data-driven, and they have with precise numbers about anything. How come if we have some modern computers, it's 2022, how come we cannot have precise information at any given point? But as you said, that you exemplified, well, we need to start understanding and living with it, imperfect information. That's a good one. Yeah, legal framework. Where do we are? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, what the European Commission has stated, and they actually told us long ago that we were going to hear from them this November. Time's running out. We got about a day left as recording this to hear from the European Commission on this, but they were going to provide some guidance coming in relation to the PEF project, Product Environmental Footprint Project, and stating not only that the PEF framework, which has already been piloted and refined many times, and it has gotten, I think, very useful. It can always get better, and there's certain issues about it that can always be improved, but it's a valuable framework for really standardizing LCAs, making them more comparable, helping them communicate well to the consumer. What the European Commission has been considering is requiring that if a company wants to make an environmental claim publicly about products, they need to back it up with a PEF, with a life cycle assessment done according to the guidelines of the Product Environmental Footprint Framework. And that would help comparability. It would raise some issues of cost and accessibility to small and medium enterprises that need to be addressed. It raises this question of, well, which data will be used and how does that get answered in a way that ensures comparability while maintaining competition on data provision. But this is a possibility that we consider very serious, a very serious possibility, serious in the sense it's highly likely and will have a large impact, that the European Commission will say, at least in Europe, in the European market, if companies are making environmental claims of any kind, that they need to back it up with a life cycle assessment done in conformance with PEF.
Well, that would be something really interesting. As you say, well, it's due now in November 2022 as we are recording this. Well, let's see if that comes anytime soon. So if we can wrap, which would be which were your thoughts if any given company is willing to improve their carbon footprint, what they should stop doing and what they should start doing to improve this carbon footprint?
That I'm going to give you two answers. The first thing to look into, it seems to me, is can you source your electricity from renewables? The electricity that you purchase, can you source that somehow from renewables? Many ways to do that, power purchase agreements and so forth. But secondly, and this probably won't surprise you that I say this, with just a few days' effort, try to obtain either a prior life cycle assessment about the kinds of products that you make, the kind of organization that you are, the products that you make, or perform a life cycle assessment in what we call a streamlined or scoping LCA. Because you may discover, for example, that the electricity you purchase is just 1% of the footprint. And 50% of the footprint is in the use phase, or 50% of the footprint is some of your key suppliers. So I think you should, it really helps if we all take action on our own consumption of energy to begin with. But you really do want to get some LCA insights. And you don't have to wait 6 months for a $50,000 life cycle assessment by a consultant. You really can jump in and get some insights either from prior LCAs on the product categories that you produce, or using a tool like Urster, again, which is very accessible and from which you can begin. You can start with templates and you can get answers in minutes, insights in minutes about the product categories that you produce in. This won't be the final story that you publish in a report, but it will be really powerful insights to help answer the question you posed, Delphine, of how do I make either my products greener or my operations, my organizational footprint greener? And the reason I say we need a life cycle assessment to really answer that question is the answer is so different for different companies and different product categories. If it was true for everyone that most of our footprint was our own electricity, then that would be the answer. But for some product categories, their own on-site footprint is trivial compared to either upstream sometimes or downstream sometimes, or both.
Well, there you go. We have learned today a lot of what we should stop doing, start doing, learn about PEF, learn about collaborative LCA. For sure, we will include a few links on the show notes of this episode to Urster and to all the thoughts that you have shared with us. So, Greg, this has been super insightful, and our audience in the urban designing community will have appreciated. So, thank you so much. And please let our listeners know where they can connect with you or where they can learn more about Urster.
Sure. Do you want that in written form or verbally?
Just say it. I mean, we will take, our producer Mariia will take a note of that and include it in the notes. But yeah, where people can connect with you for any further questions or other things I want to ask you.
Great. Well, so definitely you can reach me at either greg@urster.org or greg at gnorris at mit.edu. And definitely check out the Urster platform. Actually create an account and start using it today. You can use it for free. You can access the whole EcoInvent database that I mentioned for free. That's just app.urster.org. And I'll give you a link to the program that I direct at MIT for companies that are interested in looking at something we call the Handprint Positive Impacts. That's a project called Shine at MIT, and I'll send you a link to that too.
Shine on MIT. That sounds really good. So thank you so much, Greg, for your time today. And we will certainly come back to this topic about LCI come back to the legal framework surrounding EPDs and surrounding all carbon footprint assessment in the European Union. So thank you very much, Urbanistas, and see you the next time.
Thank you for listening to the Urbanista podcast, a production of Uponor Infra, the leader in sustainable infrastructure solutions. If you found it interesting, why don't you share it with your colleagues? We all together can move our industry forward.